Okay, we're live.
Welcome to Decision Making for School Leaders Selecting Co-Teaching Teams. I'm Taija Haller.
And I'm Michelle Damiani.
This session is brought to you by the Learning Resource Center Network, a project of the NJDOE Office of Special Education, seeking to increase opportunities and improve educational outcomes in special education. The Learning Resource Center Network provides a variety of supports, services, and professional development opportunities for educators, leaders, and families of students with disabilities. There are 4 Learning Resource Center locations, and today's professional development is brought to you by the LRC-South, located within Rowan University's College of Education. We would love for you to visit our production center and resource library. Our agenda for this professional learning video is threefold. First, we'll set the foundation by reviewing definitions and essential mindsets for co-teaching. Then we'll dive into the research-based considerations for pairing co-teachers and wrap up by reflecting on this collaborative decision-making process and the new and existing teams that result from it. By the end of our time together, we hope you will be able to identify research-based considerations for making decisions about co-teaching teams, to reflect on your current school needs and collaborative decision-making process, and to begin planning for new processes and your co-teaching teams for next school year. We would love for you to join us during our virtual follow-up session as we facilitate a supportive dialogue around these goals as well. These are the norms for our follow-up virtual discussion. We'll review them more in depth at that time. Regardless of whether or not you're able to attend the virtual discussion, we would also encourage you to share this video with a few colleagues and discuss its implication for your practice. We'll be providing a reflection tool at the end that may support you in this endeavor as well.
Okay, and as we begin, there are many different ways to organize and implement co-teaching partnerships. Defining co-teaching upfront can help us understand what co-teaching is and what it is not. In effort to ensure that we are all on the same page as we move forward, some key features of co-teaching are bolded in the 2 definitions on this slide. On the left, co-teaching is a coordinated instructional practice. Coordinated instruction as a practice in this definition involves 2 or more educators simultaneously working together to meet the needs of a heterogeneous group of students in general education classrooms. In the definition on the right, in order to be engaging in the process of co-teaching, the educators involved must co-plan, co-instruct, and co-assess. Without all 3 of these components intentionally in place, educators may be collaborating, but they are not co-teaching. Another important aspect to discuss upfront are the foundational understandings that we are using to guide the purpose and use of co-teaching in our practice. These foundations will support us in engaging in today's material and will ask you to reflect on evidence of these elements in your planning. The first, presuming competence, means that educators need to believe that all students are capable and that they have the potential to develop their thinking, learning, and understanding. This is critically important because what we believe about students directly translates to which learning opportunities students are offered. This relates to the concept of least dangerous assumption, where educators should always make decisions that, even if wrong, have the fewest repercussions against the person and are least damaging to the student's educational trajectory. In this way, presuming competence is the least dangerous assumption. This relates to our presentation today because inclusive approaches to students and adults are essential to the work of co-teaching. In the next point, strength-based and asset-based approaches hold possibilities that deficit-based approaches simply do not. As we approach the task of educating students of all ages in co-teaching partnerships with diverse skills, experiences, and needs, the importance of approaching this work in ways that look for, maximize, and value the assets of each educational professional in the partnership is imperative. Doing so can support educators' successful implementation of the process and our students. And lastly on this slide, as we talk about inclusive mindsets that guide co-teaching heterogeneous groups of students, we need to note that diversity is an asset in our schools, and that when we refer to inclusive, we mean inclusive for all students in a myriad of ways.
Now that Michelle has laid that important foundation for us, we'll turn our attention to the research-based considerations for making decisions regarding co-teaching partnerships and the importance of administrative support in that process. We know that educational leaders set the tone for co-teaching in their district and in their schools, and making thoughtful, informed decisions can set co-teachers and their students up for success. We encourage you to keep these guiding questions in mind. How do administrators select co-teaching teams? Who should be involved in making decisions about co-teaching pairings? And how are decisions communicated? And what is the potential impact of various approaches of that communication? We'll return to these questions during our follow-up virtual discussion. If you're watching this after we've had our discussion or are unable to attend, we would encourage you to consider using them with your collaborative team as well. So first, we're going to talk about selecting individual teachers as potential co-teachers. The literature points to a variety of factors that educational leaders can keep in mind during this process. Every teacher has professional strengths and assets that they would bring to a collaborative partnerships. It can be incredibly helpful for an administrator to clearly articulate what they view those strengths and assets to be. This can guide the next phase of decision-making regarding who that teacher could be paired with, as well as how that decision is shared with teachers. In the same vein, every teacher has professional needs that may impact a collaborative partnership or a co-taught class. It's prudent for administrators to consider what those needs may be so that they can ensure appropriate supports are in place and discern if placement in a co-taught class is best for students at this time. With that said, research shows that there are a few specific key areas to consider when selecting a potential co-teacher. One important factor that may often be overlooked is the teacher's willingness to co-teach. Administrators can gauge this by providing opportunities for teachers to volunteer as co-teachers, either on their own or with a requested partner, or share their input on a survey, gathering their preferences in a variety of areas that includes co-teaching. Administrators can also positively impact teachers' willingness by creating a school culture that celebrates co-teaching and the impact it has on students. We'll be coming back to this idea, but for now, we want to encourage you to consider what barriers may prevent teachers from being interested in co-teaching and the ways that administrative support could reduce those barriers. For example, a common barrier is the fear that they or their students won't be successful in a new placement like co-teaching. Administrators can reduce this barrier by providing clear expectations for co-teaching, providing professional development in a variety of formats that supports teachers in their collaboration and in meeting the needs of their diverse learners, and by prioritizing common planning time. We find that in schools where these supports are in place, teachers' willingness to co-teach increases. Research also shows that a teacher's interpersonal skills are critical to establishing an effective collaborative partnership. This includes their organizational skills as well as communication and conflict resolution skills. It's also helpful to consider areas of an individual teacher's professional expertise, such as the instructional strategies they use with fidelity or have demonstrated growth in using, as well as the depth of their content knowledge in different domains. This may provide insight into who they could be paired with so that teachers with complementary skills and knowledge bases can work together. And last, but certainly not least, administrators can look for indicators of the inclusive mindsets Michelle described earlier, as well as indicators of a growth mindset for themselves, their colleagues, and their students. So once administrators have selected individual teachers as potential co-teachers, the literature also points to a number of factors that they can keep in mind when pairing teachers together and considering team dynamics of a given pair. The importance of continuity in pairing teachers is paramount. It takes time for teams to establish rapport with one another and develop collaborative routines that promote co-planning, co-instructing, and co-assessing. Administrators can consider the effectiveness and professional growth of the team, as well as teacher input when making this decision. If a team is working well and wants to stay together, we would encourage you to prioritize keeping them together. Another consideration is the number of partners a given teacher has. Research shows that 1 or 2 partners is ideal in order for that educator to truly co-plan, co-instruct, and co-assess with each of their co-teachers. When more partners are added, those expectations for co-teaching are no longer realistic and would need to be adjusted accordingly. Thinking about factors that impact team dynamics is also important when pairing teachers together. So administrators can consider the personalities and team chemistry to ensure that teacher strengths are aligned and harmonious and find the best match possible. Parity or equality between teachers is another critical element of team dynamics. So administrators can look for indicators of parity or equality between the teachers. And again, if they're not already working together, going back to that idea of willingness and inclusive mindsets will speak to this idea of parity when they're working together. And finally, symbiosis spin speaks to the way a team is developing together and how well they work through differences of opinion. We would caution administrators on assuming that the appearance of no problems is an indicator of strong team, as we know that professional growth and learning in a collaborative partnership requires trying new strategies, and that requires change. And so what's important is how teachers approach those challenges and work through them in ways that promote collaboration and support student learning.
Building on what Taija just shared, talk a little bit about collaborative decision-making and what that might mean or what that might involve. In addition to selecting and pairing teachers with attention to team dynamics, we also need to incorporate collaborative decision-making in the administrative role of leading for successful co-teaching. When we say collaborative decision-making, we are talking about collaboration among and input from all stakeholders in the process. Consider each of these points as to whether this element of collaborative decision-making is present in your current co-teaching decision-making process. These elements are also built into a tool that we will provide shortly. The first and second, talk about those together. Teacher input and structural pairing considerations. We just talked about that. Taija just shared those specific points. And now think about, how will we expand on your decision-making so it can be informed by teacher input the next time you're making actionable decisions about co-teaching teams? The point here is to highlight that the input of teachers who are doing the work of co-teaching in classrooms is essential to the collaborative decision-making process and pairing considerations. Balancing school needs. We recognize that needs, resources, and capacity differ between schools and within schools at different times. Collaborating with stakeholders in the process can help you balance your individual school needs and your priorities and expectations as school leaders with input from teachers, while paying careful attention to structuring co-teaching partnerships in ways that allow fidelity of implementation and set all collaborative partners up for success. And lastly, messaging. Some of us may be familiar with the educational quote that begins, "I have come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element. It is my personal approach that creates the climate." And that quote continues. As a priority of collaborative decision-making, we implore school leaders to carefully consider what message you are sending about co-teaching as a practice, about the value of co-teachers in your school, and about making collaborative decision-making part of the process. Building on that, this slide addresses the impact on school community and culture. Leadership sets the tone for the school community and for the school culture around co-teaching and inclusive education. In terms of both the process of organizing co-teaching in your schools and the practice of this coordinated instructional approach, the ways that you communicate with your teams and the message that you send about the value of co-teaching will be reflected across the school culture among adults and students. Whether or not teachers feel validated and supported in co-teaching will impact teachers' willingness to co-teach. Likewise, whether or not educational professionals understand the expectations around co-teaching with transparent communication will impact their experiences and impressions of the professional practice. And so in your decision-making process, we ask you to carefully reflect on the following questions. Are you creating and supporting an inclusive school culture through co-teaching? And what evidence would demonstrate that?
So to support you in that reflection process as we wrap up with reflection are some guiding questions about reflecting on existing teams that you may have. So first is deciding whether or not to keep teams together or if change is needed. If you are considering dissolving a team, we would encourage you to pause and ask why, what's your rationale, and consider whether it aligns to the research that we've shared. It's also helpful to consider who would the change be serving, and would it be supporting teams, students, teachers, and the larger inclusive community? This is also a great time to identify possible co-teaching mentors or rising teacher leaders who could provide new support for co-teaching teams in future years and be part of a co-teaching leadership team who would be that collaborative leadership decision-making group. And as you're reflecting, you may also be thinking about new teams. And so we would just encourage you to consider any interested or willing educators that you could be reaching out to and seeking input from. New partner strengths and compatibility will be providing a reflection tool to support you in that, and thinking on that larger scale of where change might be needed in the inclusive community and how could you create or pair new teams that would support that change.
Okay, and now we've arrived at the tool. So we've created a tool that is designed to help you think about each of the elements that we've discussed today. In this recording, we'll introduce the tool, and we encourage you to use it as it is helpful for you in your current and future co-teaching planning. If you're joining us for the virtual discussion following this session, this is a great opportunity to try and use the tool and come back with questions. The tool is designed in two parts, and there are multiple ways you can access the tool. So what you see on the screen here is an image that shows you the first part of the tool. You can access this tool directly through the Google link provided at the top, the QR code provided on the left side of your screen, or the tiny URL provided on the right side of your screen. The tiny URL address is tinyurl.com/RT4CDM teams. So we hope that you'll be able to access that now, and we'll show you what you can expect when you open up that tool. The first thing that you'll be asked to do is to make a copy of this document for yourself, and that will bring you to the reflection tool. The first part of this contains several guiding reflective questions that you can work through systematically or as needed with a goal of ensuring that you have thought about each of these elements. So you can look to each of these questions in your reflective process. Think about where you might have evidence. Have you considered these elements? And if you have or haven't, document that process, or how might you make that more part of the practice moving forward. In the second part, can be used as a planning worksheet or as a brainstorming in your process for selecting teachers in a strength-based approach and making informed decisions about co-teaching teams. And so you'll see that there are opportunities to think about individual teachers, their assets, skills, and strengths that they are bringing to the partnership and the profession, as well as team dynamics that we talked about earlier, and the rationale for keeping, dissolving, or creating new pairs. We welcome your ideas about how the tool works for you and look forward to continuing the conversation. And as we wrap up today, we close with the following 3 takeaways about the power and importance of decisions related to co-teaching. First, that administrative approaches and decision-making set the tone for inclusive practices and co-teaching in your schools. They are determining that school culture around inclusion and co-teaching. That pairing co-teaching teams with intentionality and collaborative input is an important process of leadership in this, and also looking for opportunities to value co-teachers' voices, and to understand the input of various stakeholders and the educational professionals who are helping us in working through this process. We thank you for joining us today, and you can stay connected with us in a various number of ways. You may find materials of interest at the LRC using the QR code below. References are provided for today's presentation should you want to look back at the research base for any of the items that we discussed or look to the sources that supported the creation of this presentation. And finally, please join the LRC on your preferred social media handles for upcoming information, events, and opportunities. And likewise, you can connect with the New Jersey Department of Education on their social handles. Thank you again.